Greetings, and welcome back to the Ledger of Souls, where we document the accounts of human lives pushed to their absolute limits. It is truly great to have you with us. A special thank you to our dedicated community for the incredible discussions on our last story. Your insights are invaluable. If you're new here and are drawn to narratives that explore the chilling intersection of human desperation and brutal consequence, you have found your place. To make sure you never miss an entry in the ledger, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. Before we proceed, we must state that the following story is a work of fiction. The names, characters, places, and incidents are entirely the products of the imagination. Any resemblance to actual events or persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. A wedding day is a promise. It is the ultimate investment in a shared future, a celebration of love's power to conquer all. But what happens when a different kind of investment, a darker and more dangerous one, comes due? Today, we tell the story of a young couple, Marco and Elena, whose dream of a perfect life led them into the shadow of a ruthless gangster. It is a story of how a sacred vow was silenced by a broken promise, and how a wedding celebration became a horrific public execution, all because of a debt that was not paid. The scent of 1,000 white roses hung in the air, a sweet, intoxicating promise of the day to come. Elena moved through the garden of the Villa Aurelia like a dream, her hands smoothing the imaginary creases on the crisp linen of the tablecloths. Everything was perfect. The late spring sun cast a benevolent golden glow over the rolling hills of the countryside. The ancient stone of the villa exuded a timeless romance, and the army of florists, caterers, and musicians she and Marco had hired were executing their vision with flawless precision. This was more than a wedding. It was the culmination of a love story so pure and a dream so fiercely held that it felt, to Elena, like a work of art they had crafted together. She was the artist of beauty, a florist whose small, chic boutique in the city had become the go-to for those who understood that flowers were not just decoration, but emotion given form. Marco was the artist of taste. He was a chef, a prodigy whose passion for food was a fiery, all-consuming force. His dream, their shared dream, had been L'Alba, the Dawn, a restaurant that would be a testament to his culinary genius. It was this dream, this beautiful, ravenous dream, that had led them here, to this perfect day, and into the shadow of a man for whom dreams were just another form of collateral. Marco found her by the fountain, his face a mixture of awe and a deep, gnawing anxiety that he tried, and failed, to completely conceal. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, burying his face in her hair. "It's perfect, mia cara," he whispered. "Everything is perfect, just like you." Elena leaned back against him, her heart so full it felt like a tangible presence in her chest. "It's our dream, Marco. We built it, and they had." But Elena did not know the true cost of the materials. She knew Marco had struggled to secure the final round of funding for L'Alba. The banks, with their cold, clinical risk assessments, had balked at his ambitious vision. She knew he had found a private investor, a man who believed in him when no one else would. She knew this investor had been generous, providing the capital that had transformed a derelict warehouse into a stunning, Michelin star-worthy dining room. She did not know the investor's name was Silas Vescovi. She did not know his interest rates were not measured in percentages, but in fealty and fear. She did not know that his contracts were not signed with ink, but sealed with the silent understanding of brutal, unyielding consequence. Silas Vescovi was not a man who moved in the city's overt criminal circles. He was not a thug or a loan shark in the traditional sense. He was a financier of the impossible, a silent partner to the desperate. He moved with the quiet, unnerving grace of a predator, his impeccably tailored suits and soft-spoken demeanor a thin, elegant veneer over a core of absolute ruthlessness. He was known in the hushed corners of the city as the Serpent, a name earned for his ability to coil himself around a person's ambitions, to squeeze them gently at first, and then, without warning, to crush them. Marco had met him in a sterile, minimalist office that overlooked the city from a height that seemed to declare its owner's dominion over everything below. Silas hadn't been intimidating in the way of a common gangster. He had been something far more terrifying. He had been reasonable. He had listened to Marco's passionate pitch for Lalba, his reptilian eyes betraying nothing. He had understood the vision, the numbers, the potential. A dream is the most expensive thing a man can own, chef, Silas had said, his voice a low, smooth murmur. And I am in the business of funding expensive things. But my investment requires a certain discipline. I am not a bank. I do not deal in late fees and registered letters. I deal in absolutes. You will make your payments on time without exception. This is the foundation of our trust. Marco, blinded by the dazzling proximity of his dream, had agreed to everything. The initial payments had been manageable. Lalba had opened to critical acclaim, but the financial realities of a high-end restaurant were brutal. A sudden plumbing disaster, a critical piece of kitchen equipment failing, a slow winter season on 1,000 small cuts had bled the restaurant's fragile cash flow dry. Marco had started to fall behind. The first warning had been subtle. A single, perfect white rose, identical to the ones Elena used in her arrangements, left on the doorstep of their apartment. Its stem cleanly snapped in two. The second had been a visit from Silas's enforcer, a mountain of a man named Bruno, whose silence was more eloquent than any threat. He had simply sat at a table at Lalba for 3 hours during dinner service, his gaze a heavy, suffocating weight on Marco, before leaving without a word. The final warning had come 2 weeks before the wedding. Silas himself had appeared at the restaurant just after closing. He had walked through the empty dining room, his hand trailing lightly over the fine linen, his expression one of paternal disappointment. "You have built a beautiful thing here, Marco," he had said, his voice soft. "A testament to your dream, but you have been a poor custodian of mine. My investment." "I'll have the money, Silas," Marco had pleaded, his voice hoarse with desperation. "I swear, the wedding's taken everything. After that, every cent will go to you." Silas had smiled, a thin, cold curving of his lips that held no warmth. The wedding, a celebration, a public declaration of a new beginning. It is important to honor such traditions. But it is more important to honor your commitments. You owe me a significant amount. I expect to be paid, in full, before you cut the cake. "That's impossible," Marco had choked out. "I can't get that kind of money in 2 weeks. Silas had placed a paternal hand on Marco's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "A man who can build this," he said, gesturing to the beautiful room, "is a man of resourcefulness. Find a way, sell something, borrow from your lovely bride's family. I don't care about the method, only the result. You have until your wedding day. Consider it a deadline. Final one. Do not disappoint me again, Marco. It would be unseemly to mar such a happy occasion." The unspoken threat had hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Now, on the morning of his wedding, Marco was a man being pulled apart. The joy he felt when he looked at Elena was so pure and so profound it was a physical pain, because it was tainted by the cold, abject terror that coiled in his gut. He had failed. He had begged, borrowed, and scraped together what he could, but it was less than half of what he owed. The serpent was not a creature who accepted partial payments. His best man, his brother Luca, saw the panic behind his smile. "Marco, what is it?" Luca whispered as they stood waiting for the ceremony to begin. "You look like you're about to face a firing squad, not a bride." "I'm fine," Marco lied, adjusting his tie with a trembling hand. "Just nerves." He had made one last, desperate call an hour ago, to a number that was never stored in his phone. A quiet, anonymous voice had answered. Marco had begged for an extension, for a meeting, for a chance to explain. The voice had listened patiently before replying with a chilling finality. "Mr. Vescovi appreciates your call. He wishes you and your bride a long and happy life. However long that may be, all debts will be settled today." And then he saw her, Elena, walking down the aisle on her father's arm. She was a vision of such breathtaking beauty and happiness that the air left Marco's lungs. Her smile was radiant, her eyes locked on his, full of love and trust and a future he knew, with a sickening certainty, he had destroyed. In that moment, he hated himself with a purity that eclipsed even his fear. He had taken her perfect, beautiful world and dragged it into the gutter with his own reckless ambition. As she reached him and took his hand, her touch was a spark of warmth in his icy terror. He saw nothing but her. For a few precious, suspended moments, as they turned to face the officiant, the world outside of her gaze ceased to exist. He heard the familiar words of the ceremony as if through a long tunnel. He spoke his vows, his voice a hoarse whisper, his heart a frantic, trapped bird. And then, as he slid the ring onto Elena's finger, he made the mistake of looking past her, to the guests seated in the garden. And he saw them, two men, standing at the very back, under the shade of a cypress tree. They were not dressed as wedding guests. They were dressed in the quiet, dark uniformity of Silas Vescovi's service. One of them was Bruno. They were not watching the ceremony. They were watching him. The officiant's voice boomed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The guests erupted in applause, a wave of joy and celebration. But for Marco it was a death knell. He leaned in to kiss his bride, his beautiful, beloved, doomed bride. Her lips were warm and full of promise. But as he closed his eyes, the only thing he could see was the cold, reptilian gaze of Silas Vescovi. The shadow had fallen. The debt was now due. The reception was a symphony of joy, a perfect, glittering bubble of light and laughter suspended against the encroaching dusk. The Villa Aurelia's grand ballroom, with its frescoed ceilings and marble floors, had been transformed into an ethereal wonderland. Fairy lights were strung through the olive trees on the terrace. The tables were laden with Elena's breathtaking floral arrangements, and the air hummed with the cheerful chatter of friends and family. For a few precious hours, Marco allowed himself to believe. He danced with his new wife, her laughter a melody that soothed the frantic terror in his soul. He accepted the heartfelt congratulations of his guests, his smile feeling less like a mask and more like a genuine reflection of the love that surrounded him. In this bubble, Silas Vescovi did not exist. The debt was a bad dream from another life. Here, there was only the intoxicating reality of Elena in his arms, the scent of her perfume, the warmth of her hand in his. He was a husband. He was loved. He was, for a fleeting, beautiful moment, free. But the bubble was fragile, and it was about to burst. He arrived not with a thunderclap, but with a whisper. There was no screech of tires, no dramatic entrance. Silas Vescovi simply appeared at the grand archway of the ballroom, a specter of sartorial elegance in a world of joyful celebration. He was not accompanied by Bruno or his other thugs. He was alone, which was, in its own way, far more terrifying. It signified that this was not a matter of enforcement. It was a matter of personal principle. A ripple of silence spread outwards from the entrance, a tangible drop in the room's temperature. The string quartet faltered, a single violin screeching into the sudden quiet before falling silent. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Laughter caught in throats. The guests, even those who had no idea who he was, recognized the presence of a predator. Their primal instincts told them that something dangerous had just entered their sanctuary. Silas stood for a moment, his unervingly calm gaze sweeping the room. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit of impossible quality, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He looked like a distinguished elder statesman, a respected captain of industry. But his eyes, those cold, reptilian eyes, held the flat, ancient stillness of a creature that operates on a different moral plane. He spotted Marco on the dance floor, and a slow, almost gentle, smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a chess master who sees the board, the pieces, and the inevitable checkmate 16 moves ahead. He began to walk forward, his polished leather shoes making no sound on the marble floor. The guests parted before him as if he were a leper, a silent, fearful wave. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, his destination the center of the room, where Marco and Elena stood frozen, their hands still clasped. Marco felt the blood drain from his face. The terror he had been holding at bay all day returned with the force of a physical blow, a freezing wave that threatened to drown him. Elena, sensing the shift in the room and the sudden, rigid tension in her husband's body, turned. She saw the man approaching, and her expression was one of polite confusion. She did not know him. "Marco, who is that?" she whispered. Before Marco could answer, Silas had reached them. He stopped a respectful few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back. He inclined his head towards Elena, a gesture of old-world courtesy that was grotesque in its insincerity. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured purr that carried with chilling clarity in the silent room. "Forgive my intrusion. You are even more radiant than I was led to believe. Your husband is a very lucky man. My name is Silas Vescovi. I am a business associate of Marco's." He then turned his gaze to Marco, and the thin veneer of civility vanished, replaced by a cold, hard weight. "May I have a word with you, chef? There is a small matter of an overdue account I believe we need to discuss." He said it calmly, conversationally, but it was a public execution of Marco's honor. Every guest, every family member, now understood that the groom was in some kind of terrible trouble. The shame was a hot brand on Marco's face. "Not here, Silas," Marco choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, not now." "But this is the perfect time," Silas replied, his voice still unervingly pleasant. "A wedding is about promises, vows, commitments. It is a fitting occasion to discuss a commitment of a different kind. One that you have failed to honor." It was then that Elena, her heart breaking for her husband's humiliation, stepped forward. This was the fatal, tragic mistake. She did not understand the rules of the world she was now confronting. She believed in reason, in compassion, in the fundamental goodness of people. She was about to appeal to the humanity of a man who had none. "Sir," she began, her voice trembling but clear, "I am Elena. I am Marco's wife. I know he has been under a great deal of pressure with the restaurant. If there is a debt, we will pay it. I swear to you, I have some savings. My family can help. Just please, give us some time. Don't ruin this day for us." She was so beautiful, so earnest, so full of a desperate, noble hope. She looked at Silas, her eyes pleading. Silas, in turn, looked at her with an expression of genuine, almost academic curiosity. It was as if a beautiful, rare bird had willingly flown down and landed on his hand. He tilted his head, considering her. "My dear girl," he said, his tone softening into a paternal, poisonous gentleness. "You misunderstand the nature of my business. This is not about money. Not anymore. The money is an incidental detail. This is about trust. It is about respect. It is about the simple, elegant principle that when a man gives his word, he keeps it. Your husband did not." He looked back at Marco. "I gave you a deadline, chef. Clear, final deadline. I gave you the opportunity to settle your account with honor. You chose instead to hide behind this celebration. You chose to spend your money on these flowers, this music, this fantasy. You chose to prioritize your dream over your obligation. This is a profound breach of our understanding." "I have some of the money," Marco said desperately, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket pocket. "It's not all of it, but it's a start. I will get you the rest." Silas looked at the envelope with an expression of profound disinterest. "A start is not what we agreed upon. We agreed upon in full. To accept this now would be to set a bad precedent. It would suggest that my terms are negotiable. They are not. It would damage my reputation, and my reputation is the cornerstone of my entire enterprise." He then did something that froze the blood of everyone watching. He reached into his own jacket and pulled out a small, velvet-wrapped object. He unwrapped it with slow, deliberate movements. It was not a gun. It was a knife, a stiletto, its blade long, thin, and wickedly sharp, its handle made of polished black horn. It looked less like a weapon and more like a surgical instrument. "A wedding has many traditions," Silas said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a storyteller beginning a dark fable. The exchange of vows, the giving of rings, the cutting of the cake. But there is an older tradition from a time when honor was a more tangible concept, the tradition of paying a blood debt. He took a step towards Marco. Luca, Marco's brother, started to move, to intervene, but Bruno, who had materialized silently at the edge of the dance floor, simply put a hand on his chest, stopping him cold. "You made a vow to this woman today, Marco?" Silas continued, his voice now a hypnotic, chilling cadence. "A vow of fidelity, of love, of a life shared. You also made a vow to me, a vow of payment. You have broken your vow to me to celebrate your vow to her. There is a certain symmetry, then, an elegant if tragic balancing of the books. Your new life together begins with a vow, and so it must end with one." He moved with a speed that was utterly shocking. He grabbed the front of Marco's tuxedo jacket, pulling him close. He looked deep into Marco's terrified eyes. "The debt is paid," he whispered, and he thrust the stiletto into Marco's heart. It was a swift, silent, brutally efficient movement. Marco's eyes went wide with a final, uncomprehending shock. A single, soft gasp escaped his lips. He looked down at the handle protruding from his chest, and then back at Elena, his expression a silent scream of love and apology. Silas held him for a moment, as if steadying a dance partner, before letting him go. Marco crumpled to the marble floor, a broken doll in a black and white suit. A single, collective scream rose from the wedding guests, a sound of pure, animalistic horror. Elena stood frozen for a heart-stopping second, her mind unable to process the impossible, nightmarish reality of what had just happened. And then she let out a sound of such profound, soul-shattering anguish that it seemed to crack the very air in the room. She threw herself onto Marco's body, her white dress instantly beginning to bloom with a terrible crimson flower. "Marco! No! No!" Silas Vescovi stood over them, his face impassive, his suit still immaculate. He looked down at the grieving bride, his expression not of pity, but of a quiet, dispassionate finality. Elena looked up at him, her beautiful face a mask of tears, rage, and a grief so absolute it was a form of madness. "You monster!" she shrieked. "You killed him! You killed him!" "No, my dear," Silas said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "He did. He killed you both the day he signed my contract. I am simply the executor of his estate." He knelt down, a movement of surprising grace. Elena flinched away from him, trying to shield Marco's body. He reached out and, with a gentle, almost tender touch, he brushed a stray lock of hair from her tear-streaked face. "A partnership is a sacred thing," he whispered, so only she could hear. "In business and in life, you share the profits. You must also share the debts." And with the same swift, surgical precision, he drew the blade across her throat. He stood up, wiping the stiletto clean on a white linen napkin he plucked from the nearest table. He looked around the silent, horrified room, his gaze moving from one frozen, terrified face to another. He was making a point. He was signing his work. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his voice now carrying the cold, hard authority of a judge delivering a sentence. "The accounts of Silas Vescovi are always balanced. In business, there are no special occasions." He turned and walked, with the same calm, unhurried pace, back towards the grand archway. The crowd parted before him, a sea of terror. He disappeared into the night, leaving behind a shattered celebration, a ballroom that had become a tomb, and the bodies of a bride and groom, united in death on their wedding day, their blood pooling together on the cold marble floor. The uninvited guest had left, but the debt had been paid in full. The aftermath of the massacre at the Villa Aurelia was a study in silence. Not the serene, peaceful silence of the countryside, but a thick, suffocating silence born of pure, unadulterated terror. The ballroom, once a scene of joyous celebration, had become a grotesque tableau. The beautiful floral arrangements drooped in the sudden, cold air. Their sweet scent now mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Champagne glasses lay shattered on the floor. A half-eaten wedding cake stood on a nearby table, a monument to a future that would never happen. And at the center of it all lay Marco and Elena, their bodies a tragic, intertwined sculpture of love and death. The police arrived to a scene of controlled hysteria. The guests were herded into a separate wing of the villa, a collection of pale, trembling ghosts in their finest attire. At the head of the investigation was Detective Isabella Rossi, a veteran of the city's major crimes unit. She was a sharp, weary woman with eyes that had seen the worst of human nature, but even she was shaken by the sheer, brazen brutality of what had happened. This was not a crime of passion or a robbery gone wrong. This was a statement, a public execution. She knew the name Silas Vescovi before it was even whispered. He was a phantom, a man who existed in the city's ledgers of power but never in its police reports. He was untouchable, insulated by layers of legitimate businesses, high-priced lawyers, and, most effectively, by the absolute paralyzing fear he inspired. The interviews were a maddening, uniform exercise in futility. 150 guests had witnessed a double homicide. 150 people had seen Silas Vescovi walk in, commit murder, and walk out. And 150 people told Detective Rossi the same rehearsed lie. It all happened so fast. The lights were dim. I couldn't see his face clearly. A man? I don't know. There was a commotion, and then they were on the floor. I was looking the other way. Even Luca, Marco's own brother, his face a gray mask of grief and fury, could not be compelled to speak the name. Rossi saw the war in his eyes, the desperate desire for justice fighting a losing battle against the primal instinct for self-preservation. Bruno's hand on his chest had not just been a physical restraint. It had been a clear, silent message to him and everyone he loved. To speak would be to invite the serpent into his own home. You all saw him, Rossi said, her voice heavy with frustration, addressing a small group of Marco's closest friends. You saw what he did. He murdered your friends on their wedding day. And you're going to let him get away with it? An old man, a distant uncle of Elena's, looked at her with eyes full of a sad, defeated wisdom. Detective, he said, his voice a dry rasp. You are asking us to burn down our own houses to avenge a house that is already ashes. Some men are not weather. They are seasons. And this is his season. It is not wise to stand in the path of a storm you cannot stop. The investigation stalled before it ever truly began. There was no physical evidence. Silas had touched nothing but his victims and a linen napkin that had disappeared with him. The murder weapon was gone. The witnesses were silent. The case file on the murders of Marco and Elena Moretti became a monument to a perfect crime, a testament to the fact that power, in its most ruthless form, creates its own kind of invisibility. In his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Silas Vescovi began his day as he always did. He performed a precise, unchanging ritual of yoga, followed by a simple breakfast of black coffee and a single, perfect piece of fruit. He then sat at his enormous, uncluttered desk, which was made from a single slab of polished black granite. The news of the wedding day tragedy was all over the media. The stories filled with speculation about mob hits and business deals gone wrong. Silas read them with a dispassionate, analytical eye, as one might read a review of a play they had produced. His assistant, a silent, efficient young woman, placed a single, thin file on his desk. It was labeled Moretti M. Silas opened it. Inside were the loan documents, a surveillance photo of Marco and Elena laughing as they left her flower shop, and a final balance sheet showing the outstanding principal and the exorbitant interest. Silas took a heavy, crimson-colored fountain pen from a drawer. He dipped it in ink, and on the front of the file he wrote a single elegant word. Chiuso. Closed. He felt no remorse. He felt no pleasure. He felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of a master craftsman who has restored balance to a flawed creation. Marco had introduced a chaotic, dishonorable element into his ordered world. He had treated a sacred commitment as a casual inconvenience. Silas had simply corrected the error. He had balanced the ledger. The lives of Marco and Elena were, in his cold, brutal calculus, the final interest payment. The message sent by the murders echoed through the city's hidden financial ecosystem with the force of a seismic shock. Within a week, every single one of Silas's outstanding, overdue accounts was settled in full. Businessmen who had been pleading poverty suddenly found the resources. Entrepreneurs who had been gambling on extensions liquidated assets. The fear he had cultivated for years had been an abstract concept. Now it had a face. It had the face of a bride in a blood-soaked dress. His reputation was no longer just for being ruthless. It was for being an artist of consequence. His power, already immense, became absolute. Detective Rossi never closed the file. It sat on the corner of her desk for years, a cold, constant reminder of her failure, of the limits of the law in the face of a power that operated beyond it. She watched Silas Vescovi from a distance, saw him at charity galas, saw his name on the donor lists for hospitals and museums. She saw him thrive, a respected, untouchable phantom moving through the city's highest echelons, and she knew that his entire empire was built on a foundation of bones, cemented with the silence of the terrified. The restaurant, L'Alba, never reopened. It stood dark and empty, a beautiful, tragic monument to a dream that had cost 2 lives. Elena's flower shop was sold, its windows eventually filled with electronics and cheap plastic. The world moved on as it always does. The memory of the vibrant, loving couple faded into a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered by those who understood the true price of ambition in a city with a serpent at its heart. The final, chilling echo of the story came a year later. A young, ambitious designer, a woman with a fire in her eyes not unlike Marco's, sat in Silas Vescovi's sterile office. She was pitching him her dream, her voice a mixture of passion and nerves. She needed capital, and the banks had turned her down. Silas listened patiently, his hands steepled, his reptilian eyes betraying nothing. When she was finished, he allowed a long silence to fill the room before he spoke. "A dream is the most expensive thing a person can own," he said, his voice a low, smooth murmur. "And I am in the business of funding expensive things. But my investment requires a certain discipline." He looked at her, and his lips curved into that thin, cold smile. "I am not a bank," he continued. "I deal in absolutes, and my accounts are always balanced." The serpent's ledger was open once more. A new name was about to be entered, and the ghosts of a bride and groom lingered in the air, a silent, permanent warning of the price of failure.